I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The Gospel According to John, an encounter with grace and truth. Today we'll be talking about Lesson 13 of our study, which covers the Gospel according to John, chapter 10, verses 1 through 42. In this lesson, we get the closest thing to a parable that we will encounter in the Gospel according to John. As with everything else that John the Evangelist does, it's not exactly the same as parables in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It is interesting and very significant, however, and difficult. I will say, as pretty much what it does have in common with the parables in the Synoptic Gospels is the more that you poke at it and dig into it to try to analyze it, the less sense that it seems to make. That is actually a common trait of these parables, is if you happen to know what they mean already, then you read them and you know what they mean. But if you, by analysis only, try to, this part equals this thing, this part equals this thing, they fall apart pretty quickly. Which is just fascinating as a literary form, and a little crazy. That you can have something that you only know what it means if you already know what it means. And otherwise, Jesus might as well have been talking about farming, or in this case, raising sheep. But that is a feature and not a bug, right? Jesus didn't do that on accident. He's not so bad at teaching that he's trying to make a clear point and failing to do so. He's also not intending to be a great and clear teacher, or he wouldn't keep teaching in the form of parables that need to be explained further in order to be understood. So his parables, again, add fuel to the fire of, I think it's hard to see Jesus primarily as a teacher, because he didn't primarily teach. He just didn't. So, at any rate, we do have this parable here, and as we go through it, I think I'm actually going to read through a verse at a time and then try to help dissect just a little what the parts in it are. I don't think it'll take us much longer, if at all, to get through it, and it'll help us focus more clearly on the text. And I think we don't usually do that in these videos anymore, but in this case I think it'll work well. And I'll even read the parable. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. So far, so easy. You've got a sheepfold, big pen for holding sheep, and you've got anybody who doesn't, and a door, there's a door, and we know anyone who doesn't enter and exit by the door is probably not supposed to be there, thief and a robber. So far, easy, no problems, all of that makes sense. Great, I'm sure it'll continue to. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. Still good. There's a shepherd, new character, but we kind of expected in the context of a sheepfold that we would have a shepherd. And that's, how do you tell who is the shepherd and who's not? By who cares for the sheep? No. That's where this starts to get its first hint of being problematic, is the door determines the category of the person who comes to the sheep. It's not what they do. We tend to define a shepherd as the person who cares for the sheep. Here, those thieves and robbers who come in and care for the sheep, they're still thieves and robbers. If they didn't go through the door. The person who goes through the door could be there to completely ignore the sheep and to just play his lute or whatever for a while and then leave the sheepfold. But as long as he went in by the door, he is right now in the category of shepherd. which is not how we tend to define shepherds. So that's our first little bit of confusion, but we still have fairly clear idea, relatively few moving parts. We know and understand what they all are. So far, so okay. To him, the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Okay, so in addition to shepherds, we've got a gatekeeper. So we've got a gate. There is apparently someone whose job it is to open and close the gate. So we've also got a gatekeeper. Now we finally have the thing that you would expect to find in a sheepfold, sheep also, which is good. And the sheep appear to belong to the shepherd. And they know the shepherd, which is fine. That's what you would expect, right? That part is, we're on the normal side. Everything weird so far is around this door and what makes a shepherd. And the fact that you're paying someone to sit there at the door all day and open and close it. That's also on the side of not very rational. I don't think you're probably populating your sheepfold with a full-time gatekeeper on a regular basis. So everything around this door area and around a little bit of what the shepherd is a little crazy. Maybe you won't use the word crazy because this is Jesus we're talking about, is far outside of what we might be expecting to find. Everything else, totally normal. So far, still kind of okay. There's also the idea of the sheep belonging to the shepherd and knowing his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Now we do have, in the same story, two different definitions of what makes up a shepherd. Is it the gate or is it the sheep? Because now we're seeing functionally there's a definition of the shepherd of the ones the sheep know. The one the sheep know are the one who's the shepherd and they'll follow, which is, that's back to everything that you would expect, is the person the sheep are used to dealing with, that's their shepherd, they'll follow. They're not going to give the time of day to a stranger. So those are our moving pieces and our first pass at this. And then Jesus, the parable concludes with this part of it. This figure Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So far, do you understand any great truth about God from where we're at right now? I don't. Again, it's not on the surface immediately obvious. And that is not unintended by Jesus. So, we're going to have to dig into this a little bit more, but that's our first pass, and we're at least setting up the key pieces here. Continuing with the parable. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep." Okay, now, I've heard some other parables, John, and Jesus was a shepherd. And you have a parable with a shepherd here. So I didn't know what I thought it meant yet, but I was pretty sure that Jesus was the shepherd. And if I had been placing it beyond that, I would have said, Jesus must be the shepherd. These Pharisees we keep arguing with could be the thieves and robbers. We're the sheep. And maybe God the Father is the gatekeeper, and I don't know what the sheepfold is. Maybe the kingdom or something. Best guess, we're maybe getting to something like that. But now right out of the gate, Jesus says, I'm this magic door. That's the thing that is the confusing thing, right? But now it actually gets a little less confusing, because while your average sheepfold probably doesn't have a magic door that makes people shepherds or not shepherds, you can actually see Jesus being able to do that. And your relationship with Jesus being able to determine whether or not you're a shepherd. In some ways, this twist actually is helping resolve some of the conflict so far. So far. I promise I won't say that easy. But so far, we're getting a little bit of clarity. That's good. And around the idea of Jesus as the door, then other people are going to be responsible for helping tend to all of these sheep as well. And so we are sheep and or shepherds, all of us, and or thieves or robbers. And our relationship with Jesus and maybe our proximity to the pasture possibly determines which one we are. But for sure our relationship with Jesus determines which one we are. So far so good. Yes. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not heed them. Okay, that's a problem. It's a big problem. Who falls into the category of all who came before Jesus? He could be easily criticizing the Jewish leaders for not being good shepherds. No problem, we can all get on board with that. And the people of Judah and Israel had some very poor leaders who very obviously fit into the category of not good shepherds, and could even be seen as thieves and robbers. No problem. But there are some of these people we've talked about previously in this gospel. In fact, we just left off with, in the last lesson, the Jewish leaders claiming to be following in the footsteps of one particular individual who was really well known to all of these people, who for a time did work as a shepherd, who definitely your first thought is not thief and robber, but who does fit in the category of all people who came before Jesus, and that's Moses. Does he mean people like Moses and Abraham and David and all the prophets and all of these people are thieves and robbers? Because he just said that that's what he means. How can he mean that? Because they're all good guys. But what he's talking about here ends up, and that's where this is a very hard parable. So if you're confused right now or you think I'm way off, both of those things are allowable. I'd be surprised if anyone trying to think about this for the first time isn't very confused right now, and it is entirely possible that I'm way off. But let's see where we get with this at any rate. What is it that Jesus has come to do, and where is he trying to lead people? So at this point, there has not been a single human person who has entered heaven. Not one. Not Moses, not the prophets. For the sake of argument, not Enoch or Elijah. They might have walked with God or been taken up in a chariot, but our theology tells us without Jesus, the doors to heaven were not opened. They could not go in. Nobody, Adam, nobody is yet saved. No human person has yet entered heaven. The door has been closed. No one has been able to enter the door to heaven because it's closed. And it's closed to all of humanity because of sin. And so anyone who tries to lead people, Moses tried to lead the people of Israel to the promised land. Where did he get them? To a different lump of dirt, still findable on a map, where they will still suffer and die. It's a nicer piece of dirt than the one they left, flowing with milk and honey. But they will still die, and they will still suffer, and they will still struggle. And that doesn't sound like a very great promise. And that's really not an environment you want to raise your sheep in, as one of conflict and strife and death either. That's not really where you want everybody to end up. So there is a very real point of view in which no one prior to Jesus has been able to lead sheep to the pasture that God has in mind for a good and safe pasture. Because no one can get through the door. No one has gotten through that door. At this point, where the gospel is, Jesus hasn't either. He's come down, but now that he is encumbered with a human body, he hasn't yet gone back up. No human body at this point in human history has ever entered heaven. At this point, where we all are now, that's not true. There are at least two, and probably only two, but there are two. But at this point, zero, the other being Jesus' mother, right? The Assumption, which is why that's such a big deal as well. When we die, our bodies don't go up to heaven. We know where our bodies go, right? Our souls go up to heaven, and we being people who need bodies to live, we live quite literally in the body of Christ in heaven. That one that goes up there, Jesus in that sense kind of becomes the sheepfold as well, right? It's not a perfect image, but all that is happening, but that is not a thing that any of these other people could do, or a place that they could lead anyone. So, getting a little more confusing, there is a certain sense in which no one who came before Jesus was leading any of us sheep where we wanted to go. And by the definition of you're either a shepherd or you're a thief and a robber, you're a thief and a robber. So I think that's kind of what he's hinting at there. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find a pasture. So now that makes sense, right? Jesus can be the door insofar as he's the only one who's ever passed or is going to pass into heaven, and it's only through him that any of us gets there. Sheep, shepherds, anyone alike, no one can cheat their way into heaven. It's one door, one way in, one pathway. So hopefully at this point that part makes a little bit more sense. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. Again, that is the thing that Jesus uniquely and only can do, is give life. The only thing people know how to bring about is death. Only Jesus knows how to bring about life, and he wants to give it to the sheep. So that hopefully gets us a little bit more clarity. We definitely have more parable to talk through here, but that is moving forward. So after just a little road bump here at the very beginning, I think we'll be on the downhill at that point, and this should be easier. Our last road bump is, so what is Jesus so far in this parable? He is the gate, good. Now he's also the shepherd. If you're trying now to visualize this in your head, that's going to create, or to draw it, that's going to create a significant problem. Just try for a minute if you want. I can't think of a version of that that's not a little amusing. Again, these parables not perfect in terms of one-for-one matches. They are in some ways more perfect than that in what they actually reveal to us. But if you can accept that Jesus can be both the gate and the shepherd, that again makes great sense with what we're talking about. He is the pathway by which anyone can enter heaven, and he is the one who leads us there. And he does it, as he says here, by laying down his life. And nobody else did it because nobody else was willing to lay down their life because they were not the shepherd. They were just hirelings. We had thief and robber or shepherd. We didn't have hirelings, which is actually categorically something that helps us deal with the likes of Moses and David and some of these others. They are not in the family in the same way that Jesus is, right? Family business, dad, father, God, son, Jesus, are more invested in the family business than all of these hirelings that have helped take a part here before. Moses did not die for the people of Israel. David did not die for the people of Judah or Israel. The prophets did, and they're in a kind of a category all on their own. But as we're looking at this, they also didn't lead the sheep into the good pasture still. So Jesus, gate and shepherd, how can he be both? Well, he's actually entering through himself into heaven, right? The human part of Jesus is entering through the God part of Jesus into heaven. He is both. In being fully human and fully divine, humanity is through this combined person of Jesus entering into heaven. A human person, shepherd, is going into heaven and is going through the door of Jesus' divinity. It's just the same guy. The reason it's so crazy in this parable is because you have the hypostatic union. You have divinity and humanity joined in one person, and that really doesn't lend itself to being drawn or described in images. But because of that, this parable does tell us something fascinating about the nature of Jesus, and lets us reflect on that in a way that it wouldn't if it were a clearer one-for-one parable. Because then it would just be matching what we're used to and what we can understand. And God is not what we're used to or what we can understand. So in being a little bit askew, this parable actually tells us more about God than if it were easy and not that way. And now we get, not only is Jesus the shepherd, I am the good shepherd. What makes a shepherd good? It does seem to be laying down your life for your sheep. Not a lot of good shepherds in the business. In the real shepherding business, probably approaching zero. And if it's not zero, there was probably an accident involved. And then it doesn't really count as laying down your life, does it? So probably pretty close to zero. But this is, again, a different kind of shepherding. This is shepherding of souls and not of sheep. And then Jesus also points out, he always reminds us throughout this gospel of this relationship between the Father and him, and for this, in this case, the sheep as well, right? There's a knowing relationship between I know my sheep and my sheep know me, and I know the Father and the Father knows me. He's starting to set up, that sounds like a pretty gate function to me, right? There's this property by which if Jesus knows God and I know Jesus, then I start to be able to, through Jesus, know God. He will go into that in much greater detail, but he's starting to set up that idea that if you know Jesus, you know God. And so even as he is the shepherd, he's a very gatey shepherd. And it's just still that dual role contained in one thing. Then there's one thing here that I've read tons of speculation on this, some of it more rooted than other parts, but there's this idea that he has other flocks as well. This could mean a lot of things, from Gentiles, it seems like an extremely likely possibility, all the way to, I've heard, space aliens being described as part of that. There is a diocese of outer space in the Catholic Church, so you never know. And we certainly won't rule that out, and if there are, we need to evangelize them. So that could be a thing someday, but for now, we don't know that. Gentiles seems pretty good to me. But we'll see. At any rate, yeah, that's probably all I need to say about that. Jesus, Good Shepherd. Jesus also a gate. Any access to heaven comes through Jesus. And you know, the idea of him as a shepherd suggests that he is actually interested in caring for and leading us. Worth also mentioning that the idea means he wants us to get to where we're going and wants to round us all up and take us to heaven. He's not just a gate sitting there if we want to go through it. He's also trying to round us up and push us through it no matter how stubborn we are, which is a comforting thought, because I can be pretty stubborn. Now we see something that we will for sure come back to throughout this gospel. And it's a thing worth making sure we're all on the same page about, even at this point of the gospel. Jesus makes a strong point of the fact that he is laying down his life. It's not being taken from him. He's laying it down. There's a difference. There's a huge difference. Fundamentally speaking, and those who have done some of our other studies may have more background in this idea, the general laws that govern life and death, the covenant, reduce fairly easily to if you sin, you die, and if you don't sin, you don't die. Earlier in this study on these videos, we've talked about life being a directional thing, right? Like you're always trending toward being alive, so that even if somebody kills something that's alive, it becomes alive again. Versus all of us who are dead are trending ever toward being dead, and it is inevitable. And that difference. Jesus, being alive, can't die. And he needs to die for this thing to happen. So, but we can't kill him. And we'll see when we get there. In John's Gospel, there's a subtle thing that happens with Jesus' death that supports this idea of it being his agency, and all done by Jesus, which supports how the evangelist views life and death, and views Jesus' life as entirely his own and untakeable, which is an important difference. I think we like so much the idea of flawed heroes in various capacities that there's something that we want to have resonate with us, with the idea, or it's easier to understand, so we start going along with it whether we meant to or not, that, you know, we got Jesus in the end, right? Humanity actually killed God. But that is not how this gospel portrays that at all. Humanity didn't kill God. God gave up his spirit. He let his life leave his body. But it's not because we did that. It's because he did that. It's a subtle but a very important difference. He's God. We can't change him or kill him at all. And here he's laying the foundation for that. He's laying down his life, and he's going to take it up again. Which, again, he has the power to do because he is alive. He's never not, even when he is what we would call dead, he is never not alive. He's never not in absolute control of his own life. So yeah, he can be what we would call dead, and then can just be alive again at his whim, because death is not a thing that applies, which is a hard thing for us to come to terms with, but it's an important thing for us to come to terms with because that's what he's inviting us to do. Here at the end of this parable, that's where he's trying to lead all of us, is to that same life. So it's important for us to know how that's being established, because at the time Jesus is talking about it, it doesn't exist yet. Through his death and resurrection, we can then come into that life ourselves, and we'll talk about how that works. But all of that hinges on him having absolute control over his own life. So we'll get into that much more, but here we're starting to lay that idea down really solidly. And the text will help us support that as we move even more into themes of life and death. Not in this lesson, but beyond here. We're going to get pretty quickly into things very, very much about life and death. And then we'll just keep building from there. All of this is happening on the feast of the dedication of the temple, and Jesus is in town in the temple. Hanukkah would be how we tend to recognize this idea now. And the Jews, again probably meaning the Jewish leaders, gather around Jesus. Their game has not changed. They're still trying to get something on him. They're trying to get him to say openly, I am the Messiah, I am the Christ, I am a king. Because if he says it and they have evidence, witnesses that can prove that he said it, then they have something to go to Rome with. So again, they're not asking, hey, we really want to know where you sent from God, so that we can figure out what to do about that. The nature of this question is really driving toward, please incriminate yourself so that we can deal with you the way we want to, which colors how Jesus answers, which we'll see presently. Here again, Jesus returns to basically what he said the last 2 times they've had this conversation with them, which is, you want to know who I am? I've told you, but more importantly, I've shown you. Look at what I do, or have done. What he doesn't do is say, I'm the Messiah, which again would be falling into their trap. Or, I'm not the Messiah, which would also be giving them leverage to work with. He doesn't answer the question. And he does answer the question. He just doesn't do it in their terms or framing. And yeah, he again points back to, look at what I've done. And from that, everybody should be able to figure it out. What I have done and also what I am doing are the things that the Messiah would do, but not how you think about it. And David himself was a shepherd, right? This image of good shepherd, and Moses puts Jesus in a line of these shepherds that God has called to lead his people to better things. And Jesus is kind of doubling down on, I'll just be a shepherd. And I'm doing shepherdy and gate things. And we'll just leave it at that, briefly, and look at the things I'm doing, and you know the answer to your question. So Jesus was doing really well with, just think of me as a shepherd, and look at what I'm doing, and then he has to go and tack on that last point. I and the Father are one. It's a strange statement, right? That's a different statement from I am the Son of God, which is what they end up talking about for the rest of this section, as though that's what he had said. But it's not what he had said. And it's important for us that we are aware that's not what he said. Yes, sure, the Son of God is the thing that he is, but God is also a thing that he is. And that's the one that he said here. I and the Father are one. You don't say that about you and your dad, right? You don't say, we're one. You know that you're two different people, and you're related, but you wouldn't say that you're one. This is a radical claim. And they don't miss the point, right? They are immediately ready to stone him for blasphemy. And except in the preposterous case that what he's saying is correct, he is blaspheming. And, Son of God is one thing that could be, maybe people could sort of get their heads around, because there was precedent in other mythological traditions and whatever. Being God, less so, especially for a tremendously monotheistic society. That is blasphemy. The only way that it's not is if it's true. And they don't have the framework in their background that they can see to accept and to understand that that's true. Even if Jesus points out there are a few places, is it not written in your law? Again, yours, not mine, yours. There's distance between me and this. This is for you, not for me. I come before that, and I'll follow it, but it's yours, not mine. Because, I'm God, not a person. And God is not subject to the law of Moses. And I don't think anyone would claim that he is. He still follows it because he's also a person. But your law. And then he cites examples of a thing like this where God's teaching and word can come to people. And I said to you, you are God's. He's not only citing him, but what he's trying to do for them, right? God became human so that humanity can become divine. You are God's is meant to, there's a sense in which everyone is meant to share in the divinity of God through Jesus, and not just Jesus. So there's a sense in which this is not just first there was God the Father, then there was God the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and that's it sort of thing. We are all, in a sense, not called to be co-equal with God, but called to share in a very real sense in his divine life. Again, we've talked about before on these videos, humanity being a joining of the human and the divine, and God's divine life living in all of us. So there's a certain sense and a framework in which this is easier to understand and harder at the same time, and that is the thing that should be relatable to all of us as people, just not to the degree and to the extent of what Jesus is claiming and being. And so, they're trying to kill Jesus for making himself God. Also, he's finally given him the thing that they were looking for. They've given them something that they can really get some mileage with. These people are seriously enough monotheistic that being able to repeat that Jesus said he was God is going to get them a lot farther than but he healed someone on the Sabbath. When that guy who was born blind stopped being blind, it was Saturday, so that's bad. Doesn't get a lot of mileage, versus he said he was God. You can rally people behind that idea. And again, did he do that on accident? Definitely not. We are moving into, not to quote popular movies and culture, but we're moving into the end game at this point. This is wrapping up this phase of Jesus' ministry and moving into the next step of what he's here to do, which relates to why he's talking about life and death so much, since that's intimately involved in what comes next. We've got a lot of gospel left. We don't have a lot of time left in terms of the length of Jesus' ministry. And this claim that he makes here directly plays a part in accelerating that. So that happens. And then Jesus leaves town again, which we've seen. And the next time he comes back to Jerusalem will be different from all the other times that he's been in Jerusalem, now that he's made that claim. So that's all hanging over our heads, and we'll see where all of that leads moving forward. This has been an overview of Lesson 13 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study. The Gospel According to John, an encounter with grace and truth. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online